My favourite session to give athletes for prepping for open water swimming is something so disgusting that it makes the race feel like a doddle. I've got a few absolute belters that we'll come to later in this podcast, but I can certainly tell you that the one I've used this week for people racing in May. I've got several athletes. And the one that I've sort of favoured with people is 200 takeout speed. So, for these guys, this is, probably, 2:45 to 3 minutes worth of fairly hard swimming into 400 meters settle at race pace, which, it's a fairly substantial chunk, for some anything from 8 to 9 minutes worth of work for people. And yeah, it's vile. And the feedback I get is athletes disgusted with the fact I set it, but I absolutely know it from years of experience. On race day, they'll thank me for it.
That's funny. I've got one that I've never given anybody before, but it's a set that I used to do on occasion. I first did it when I was about 14, 15, just getting into triathlon, and my swim coach gave it to me. I thought it was the perfect uh, triathlon specific set, and it was 12, 12 turns off like 30, 40 second rest, done as 50 metres butterfly into 150 freestyle at threshold. And each subsequent 200, you would move the 50 butterfly through the 200. So it was the first one, then it was the second 50, then the third 50, fourth 50. That was brutal. But I've
So
not as good
of
at.
the 12 200, it's 150 threshold into 50 fly.
Yes.
Oh yeah, lovely. Yeah. And look, I mean, we'll talk about another one. I mean, I've got one later in the that I was given 10 years or so ago. I never finished a set, but it didn't even matter. It was the fact that I even tried to do it meant that the race was so undaunting that, and actually, if you're thinking about it from a physiological training point of view, I'm not even sure it made that much sense. It didn't necessarily make me a better swimmer, but mentally it put me in the right place to go and race. So, as you probably guessed, we're gonna talk this week about open water swimming, and we'll definitely talk more about horrible things you can do to make what I think in triathlon is one of the most daunting parts of the race for people. Various reasons. One, we are land animals. We are absolutely out of our comfort zone. Your head is underwater. You cannot breathe at will. Um, I think it's also because it's the very start of the race. Even that anticipation of a 5K running race, how that first few minutes is going to feel is so when you're doing that with your head underwater and you can't quite see where you're going, and there's you need it to unfold. And I think the first part of the swim is, I certainly used to have, I would say it was anxiety before the race. I did know that once I settled into the middle of the swim and got back on land, and the race would just unfold the way I need it to unfold. So I do, as a coach, have a fairly strong view on um, not necessarily, and we'll get into this, the need to swim open water all the time, but certainly the need to think about what is required on race day for the act of swim racing.
I think there's a physical side to it and there's a mental side to it. And the physical side is definitely trainable in a pool. I think the mental side can be, as you say, it is quite a challenge, and it's a barrier for a lot of people, particularly people that are newer to swimming. Maybe they learn to swim as an adult, and they'll learn to swim in a pool. Swimming suddenly open water, whether that's a lake or in the sea, it's a big step up. It's a big change. There's lots more going on, and so building up those steps a little bit to get to the point of feeling comfortable psychologically
Yeah.
is definitely huge.
Yeah, I think we'll try today to cover. We were talking about very advanced swim sets in the case of yours there, and look, there's a whole myriad of different worries and concerns and skill levels out there, and and actually even some very good athletes, on land. Maybe I've got some. In fact, I coach a really good athlete that is, really confident, a lot of very good results, but really struggles with with getting incredibly hypoxic, and I think a lot of it's to do with like nerves and that anticipation at the start of the race, and had to do some work on the mindset behind that. And so we will try to be fairly broad here, but I think a nice place to start is this slightly weird. I mean, I'm sat in a very sunny and warm southeast at the moment, but I can assure you it's not been sunny and warm long enough to heat the lake up yet. So we're in this little window where lot of athletes, big weekend of racing last weekend, a lot of people about to race in May. I think of like big UK events like Outlaw, a lot of people going to Mallorca. How are you going to train for open water when you can't really go and train for long enough in a lake? And well, most people wouldn't even want to get in a lake at the temperature they're at the moment.
For sure. And I think, it brings it down to what is the swim portion of a triathlon. And it's a long way without any walls, primarily. There's not a wall to have a break at every 25 or 50 metres if you're lucky. And then there's the environment of the open water, whether there's a chop on the lake, whether it's currents in the sea, waves in the sea. And then thirdly, you're swimming in amongst a whole load of people. So with those three things in mind, how can we kind of break that down and replicate some of those things in a pool setting so that when we get to the race, it's less of a massive shock or something completely different, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about that, and then we'll get on to and then how you transfer that into your open water setting. And yeah, I think just before we do, like one thing I will say about being comfortable in different environments. When I actually coach swimming with athletes, and I put my hand up to not be, I certainly don't coach from the swimming textbook of how you might coach a youngster to swim through traditional channels. We're dealing with a lot of adult onset swimmers, and there's lots of different mindset. One thing I always talk to them about is play in the water. Learn to move in different ways, and that could be swimming different strokes. It could be learning to tumble turn. It could be moving, and we were doing some stuff on camp with people, having them swimming in all kinds of weird ways under the water. And it's just about, yeah, if you think of it as play, then there's no nerves involved. And I actually was fortunate enough I did grow up with a bit of a surfing background, and I think that really helped me outperform in open water. And I do think one of the outperforming is, the more outperform my pool ability in open water, because I was relaxed in any environment. In fact, the choppier it got, the further up the field I was. But it comes from, I grew up playing in the water. And I actually do say to athletes, if you're going on a summer holiday and you're near the beach, or you've got the chance to go snorkeling, if you've got like these don't really sound like normal triathlon coaching tips, but if this person isn't at ease in open water, or, I was also fortunate enough to live by the coast, and we spent time jumping off cliffs and swimming in the sea, and it's natural in that environment to you. And I think it's something that people can get more at ease with. And a lot of what we're about to talk about here, I think, can be thought of in the realms of play. Getting a group together in the pool and swimming on each other's feet, turning around imaginary buoys in the lane because you can't take the lane ropes out because that's not what your pool does. But it's like stripped away from the seriousness of day-to-day training, and just start to play at the skills. I do it when I go training for off-road site. I went this morning. What's the point? You always have to have a point to a session. 1 hour easy on the gravel bike. It's not going to make me a fitter rider, is it? So I went playing. I found some little single track. I made myself better at the skills. Same with open water.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I coach a swim group every week up here, and one of the funnest, or the sessions where we have the most fun, is when we get together and we maybe swim 4 or 5 abreast in a lane, and there's lots of shenanigans going on. There's people pulling ankles, shoulders, what have you, trying to race. And doing it in a fun environment that, it's not serious. Everybody knows kind of what to expect. Nobody's trying to hurt anybody or anything. And you get better at it.
So just talk to me that you obviously have this swim squad that I know you work with on a weekly basis. You're obviously thinking about, you'll be in exactly this phase, open water skills alongside the normal swim training. Talk me through some of the process there.
Yeah, so
How can listen? Just jump in. How can listeners go and do this themselves. That's probably the best way to get it across.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. If you're by yourself, it's challenging, yet not impossible. And this is going back to, what's the most important factor of swimming open water, and for me that is definitely, the distance between stopping, and doing lots of long intervals becomes quite important right now. Can you swim, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a kilometre just straight, without a
Do you
rest?
feel guilty as a coach putting that in people's training sessions? Because I think it's one of the least like things they see in their training plan for the week.
Oh, 100%. I mean, mentally it's torturous, right? And it's much harder in a pool than it is open water as well, certainly from a mental perspective. But I think that's first, build up the strength, build up that strength endurance. If there are people to swim with, then I think that second part becomes important, where you can use others to firstly become comfortable swimming amongst others, and secondly, if you can take that one step further, and this is a lot of work that I used to do when I was racing, was actually how can you first of all own your space, second of all manipulate others in a perfectly legal, safe way to move where you want to move. And there's a number of different techniques, which is probably quite hard to describe on a podcast, but I'll try very quickly, and if it doesn't come across, you can stop me. But as long as your chest is ahead of their chest, then you can direct where the movement goes. As soon as your head is below their chest, then you cannot budge them, no matter how big, small, the size difference. So teaching skills like that, teaching skills like how can I, if I'm here and somebody's there, how can I get to this side of them by rolling over them? All these fun skills become really, really useful when we get open water. And I think, certainly from my experience in the age group world, probably because of opportunity, probably also a lack of knowledge, these things aren't very common. But if you can get comfortable at these things, swimming open water becomes so much easier to navigate.
Yeah, yeah. I think. I mean, look, you obviously were racing in an environment where everyone is shoulder to shoulder. I obviously been doing this long enough to remember when everything was a mass start, and a lot of things now are wave starts. Probably makes people feel a little bit more at ease, but I don't think it actually takes away the need for these skills. I can think of, I mean, God, even the last time I open water swam with friends, we were swimming in a group in before 70.3 Marbella, and you are on people's shoulders. You're having a bit of a race next one to the coffee boat kind of situation. What we were doing, and yeah, you do actually use those skills, and it's stuff you've developed from being in those situations. I don't think it's taught enough. I think it's often overlooked. Look, time crunched world, what's more important, getting your swim training done or teaching these skills. But I actually think swimming, we have athletes that I won't get into the whole how the winter looks, but the one thing that people are probably doing plenty of over the winter is high quality swimming. Your swim should be fairly on point coming into the race season, and there should be room in your plan for this kind of a thing now. And we'll certainly come to open water and how much of the time should be divided between hard work and skill based stuff. So yeah, in the pool, I mean, I think one of the first things people age groupers worry about is time in the wetsuit. Look, I think it's a real thing. Overcoming the resistance of the suit a little bit, and just being strong in that specific way you wear in that slightly, even with a modern suit, there's still a restriction, and just being used to that. I don't know about you, but I do encourage, some of these 3 times a K, 4 times a K type swims. Put your wetsuit on, keep it on. If you're lucky enough, you've got an old wetsuit from previous season, great, get that on in the pool. Keep it on till you get too warm, and then just at the point you're a bit warm, take it off, and go to this set instead if you like. So, but I do like people to swim in the suit once a week. There's also the fact that it does change your body position as well. It it will sit you a bit higher in the water. Yeah, you could argue if you use pull buoy and stuff like that, but I still think it's a unique position. And I think it's just good to dial in swimming in the suit through these months where you can't get in open water. I think once you can get in open water, you're fine to. So I don't. Do you do much work with people in the suit?
Yeah, I think it's super important as well. There is a fatigability to certainly the recovery of the stroke. You can kind of feel it in the back of your shoulders if you throw it on for the first time in a while. Just exactly as you say, because of that resistance. The other thing that I would add to that is actually knowing how to put a suit on, which again is a largely overlooked
What, zip up the
part
front?
of.
I
That's exactly
have
what
to
we
say,
do. Yeah.
I have seen it twice in my career.
I mean, hopefully you know which direction the suit goes on. Putting it on in such a way to create enough room around the shoulders to
Agreed.
lessen that
Really
restriction
important.
as much as there are a few tutorials online about it, but there's not a lot,
I think
and
this is so
it definitely
important.
requires a lot
Talk
of work.
talk me through how you do it, and I'll tell you how I'd do it.
Okay, first things first. I would cut off the ankles about an inch above the ankles diagonally. Create a bigger hole. I know you've just bought a 400, 500, 600 pound wetsuit, and I'm telling you to cut it apart. But you'll thank me at the end of the swim, and you can
There
stamp
is a
out of it
slight
nicely.
limit though, hey, where there is a limit on the seam internally, where normally there is a point you can't cut past. So just have a look internally, and you'll see that there's definitely on a lot of suits, especially on like I've got short arms. I have had to consider the arm length, and just be a little careful. You don't cut past a point of no return. Carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, I accept no responsibility for damaging your suit. Just putting that out there, put that disclaimer out there. And then second of all, so suit goes on through the feet. If you yourself and you can't zip it up, zip a little bit up to start, and then on your feet, pull your legs up, or the bottom of your legs up to about halfway up your calf, maybe a little bit below halfway, and then hike the rest up. And then the really, really important part is to get the crotch as high as possible, almost to an uncomfortable level. You want to give yourself a
Wedgie.
proper wedgie.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that just creates enough space in the upper body, and then it's get your arms in, to a reasonable position, create that room around the shoulders, zip it up. Once you've done that, get a friend to hold the zip and give it a good yank up and down. And that should just create that little bit more space in the shoulders, and it should feel nice and free. That would be how I would do it. Have you got any
Yeah.
other
I mean,
suggestions?
the same really, but I think that bit of the zip, that's the bit people miss, is the zip bit at the back where, I'd nearly get someone to, and we're not talking about that, we're talking about like that whole zip area, that thicker bit of the wetsuit on the back where you can get hold of it and give it a good pull up, and nearly, I have the athlete slightly pull it over the, anyone watching on YouTube can sort of see this now, but as someone's pulling it up the back, just pull over the shoulders as well, just create that room in the upper body. And I've honestly found, I would say, I've got no evidence to back this up, but when I've either forgotten to do that or been in a situation where I've had to rush to put a suit on, and you swim worse for it. You swim slow. It's so critical. Yet when I do it to athletes, nobody knows it. So hopefully, if there's one thing anyone takes from this podcast, maybe we should just share this at 19 minutes into the podcast. Listen to this; it will change your season. So yeah.
I hope so. If you do put it on and you're by yourself, and it's not quite fitting right, and you've got access to go into the water, obviously probably not right now when it's cold. You don't want to be in the water before the race start. But if you do go in the water, get some water down the suit, and you can kind of wriggle around and get it comfortable by yourself. That
Even
would be
even when you going back to you using the wetsuit in the pool again, you've come out of training, you've put your suit on. The very first thing I do is jump in the pool, get water in it, get out, do the adjustments, get in, start my session. I never see anybody else do that. Get in, soak it through, get out, flush the water out. Then you've got this suit that's more pliable, and the water has just helped like then stick it to your body a little bit more internally. I don't mean in a bad way, but just, you feel like your suit is finally on properly. So, and same I actually used to always carry an extra bottle of water to a race start with me for that. If I can't get in the water before the race, I can at least soak a full litre and a half water, and I would like get my suit really wet inside.
Yeah.
And these are these little things that, we've probably already said half a dozen things here that can enhance your performance on race day. We haven't even got into the actual nitty gritty of open water swimming yet.
No, I know. It's funny when you start talking about these things, you reflect back and you think of all the little tips and tricks that you've picked up over the years, um, that are often forgotten and not really passed on in the same way through circles as, triathlons became such a big sport before it was a little small circle and everybody would share all the tips and tricks. But when it becomes really big, that gets a little bit diffuse.
Yeah.
I
So right, we're in the pool. We're in our wetsuit. What else? What else are we practicing in this period that we can't quite get in the lake yet?
the other big one is awareness. Awareness of where you are. Obviously, when you're in the pool, that's quite easy. You are swimming up and down. There's a black line to your left or to your right. You've got a lane rope. You know where you're going. Open water, that becomes a lot more challenging, and so we need to be aware of our surroundings, of the direction that we're swimming in. I think there's two things here. Firstly, there is being able to breathe to both sides so that you can see left and right. And then secondly, sighting. So we can practice both of these things in the pool before we take it to open water. And then when we get open water, there's extra layers that we can add on to that.
Yeah, I agree. And they're simple things to bring in. Breathe. I was always a breathe one side kind of. That's just the way I swam. But you have to have the skills to. This is. It always felt clunky to me, breathing to my non-favoured side. But in a race, it's just another skill that you need, to check who's next to you, to see the wave coming at Ironman Wales that's about to mean that you're not even going to get a breath this time because your whole body's underwater. And, those kind of environments where you do just need to see what's happening. From a sighting point of view, I think it's such an easy drill. I mean, I set it really easily. You put your water bottle at the end of the pool, and every time you're swimming towards your water bottle, 3 times during that length, we're sighting. And you're training the body to change position as little as possible, to disrupt your stroke as little as possible, to make sighting something that gives you the function of course, swimming in a straight line, seeing where you're going, but without slowing you down, without breaking rhythm. And actually, it's something that we probably should have it in. It's just a great skill to practice year round. To be quite honest, it's a nice warm up drill. And again, I think when you're sighting a lot, you move, especially if you were swimming an Ironman, you're going to sight how many times in an Ironman? That's an awful lot of movements you wouldn't be used to if you're not used to training it. You've then also, you've just moved your neck muscles in that direction a lot of times you're not used to. You then get on a time trial bike where you also use, you can see that there becomes an issue with, fatigue and postural muscles that you really don't want during a race. So, yeah, I agree. They're definitely the two for me,
Yeah.
as well as what you were talking about earlier with. If you have the chance to swim in close contact with others, make it a game, make it fun, and make the race start feel really natural to you.
The one thing I'd add there, if you're not lucky enough to swim with a group, is to embrace public lanes. Embrace the stop start, embrace the, I don't know, the little old lady that's doing breaststroke kick in the fast lane.
No, mate. Aqua aerobics, mate. That's what you need. Jen actually came back from the pool the other day and said, "I've just had my first open water swim in the year. There was one lane, and the rest of the pool was aqua aerobics, and there was no proper lane rope, so it was literally like being in a washing machine." But so I think some people would get out the pool if that was going on. Just flip it around and go, well, I'm not going to get the session. Hey coach, didn't quite do the VO2 session you set, but you know what? I did just get a wave machine simulation for an hour. So
I'll tell you what we used to do in this. I'm not sure how useful it was, but it used to be enjoyable when we go back to playing. one of the drills that we used to do was there may be 5 or 6 of us. We'd have a lane, and one person would be at the end of the lane, and then the other 4 or 5 would be maybe 5, 10 meters apart as you went down the lane. And they would either have a woggle or they would have some kickboards or some kind of float. The goal was for the person at the end of the lane to get to the other end of the lane, whilst all the people in the middle of the lane were trying to stop them by hitting them with the floats, hitting them with the woggles.
Sounds like a swimming
Gladiators
version.
style.
Sounds like a swimming version of Gladiators. That so yeah, yeah. But
Exactly.
look, some people might think, yeah, this all sounds great, but I just need to focus on my swim technique. But you were operating at a world class level, and this is going on in the pool. It shows the importance of it.
Listen, 100%. There's a difference, as you were saying at the start. There's a difference between swimming in a pool and swimming open water. When you swim in a pool, if you were to do a pool race, you've got the line to yourself. Nothing's interrupting you. Nothing's getting in your way. Open water, you've got multitude of things to stop you in your tracks, and you've got to get used to maintaining momentum and being able to get around that. And with that, there are a few technique changes that you should, or you certainly could make to your stroke to make it a little bit more efficient in the open water. Things like an increase in stroke rate become really quite important, where if you lose an arm, if you lose somebody knocks your arm over, you lose a catch, and if you've got a faster stroke rate, you're quicker to get on top, you're quicker to hold momentum, you're not going to be stood still. There are a few other kind of small tweaks that you can make, but I won't labour the point.
Yeah, no, look, I actually think it's a really good point. I think it's common, it's actually misunderstood. So some people are great in the pool and they go to open water and underperform. Other people are all right in the pool and they go to open water and they outperform themselves. But I don't think they ever truly understand why. I think when you watch someone swim, there's quite a lot of tells that, if you watch them in the pool, you might be able to see, oh, there's a good chance this will translate better to open water and not. And same the other way. I was talking to someone the other day about a straight arm recovery in swimming. This was like, should we recover with the traditional high elbow, straight arm? I actually personally, I swam with my right arm was a traditional bent elbow, and my left arm came over a straight recovery. I mean, how you recover over the water, as long as the hand enters in the correct way, I don't really have a massive issue with it. The difference being is to increase the stroke rate, that relaxed recovery and getting the arm back around quick enough. Without pulling the stroke short, different for different people how you get to that objective. This particular athlete was saying, look, when I swim with a straight arm recovery, they are a short athlete. They are going to need to turn over quickly. They've got very short arms, short person. They were like, I feel like that straight arm recovery helps me, helps my cadence massively. And as long as that's not shortening the stroke underwater, then I didn't really see it as a bad thing. I guess their question was, but that's not how you're meant to swim. Well, I think there's different workarounds for, I mean, most of us don't swim like you're meant to swim if you were watching the perfect swim form. So I do always, when I'm working with someone who's swimming, it's the best way to get that person to swim as well as possible. And there's different work. We're not talking about coaching Olympians here. Yeah, and I think this conversation went on a little bit further. I probably am labouring the point here a little bit, but it went to the point of one thing and I don't know how I ended up understanding it, but it is something I try to teach to athletes, is the full set of skills. Can you swim a good, efficient long stroke? Can you move to a faster stroke? Can you swim with a bent arm recovery and a straight arm recovery? Can you vary this? Can you breathe both sides? As you were saying, having the full skill set being able to feel what's required for what condition, even, wind in one direction, wind in the other, current in that is in a way with open water what we're striving towards. Yet in the pool environment, there's no need to think about all that because it's a stable environment.
It's a really important point, that, and actually, I'm sure some people listening to this will know the name, but Richard Varga, without a doubt, the best ITU swimmer, certainly for a generation. Something that he used to say was, which worked tremendously well, and I'd never heard it until he said it. When you're swimming into waves, when you're swimming into chop, shorten the stroke, get in nice and quick, get in early, go deep, deep with that catch and pull back. When you've got the chop behind you, that's the time to lengthen out. That's the time to go to your traditional pull stroke. When you're swimming in really close quarters with people, then having a straight arm recovery is a good thing, because it means you're not going to hit into the person next to you. You can come up and over. So exactly as you say, there are a number of scenarios in which swimming differently becomes really, really important, or certainly it can make the open water a lot more efficient.
Yeah, and it's so important to learn it because you can do all the training in the world, but you're talking about minutes worth of difference in these like 70.3 and Ironman swims for having this extra skill set. And I don't think they're difficult to learn. I just think most people aren't aware of them. And actually, again, I go back to that simple, on your summer holiday challenge, stable environments are relatively easy to, and I think a lot of people feel safe, and that's about all they can cope with. Try and go in more unstable environments. Lots of people lake swim in the UK. Great. If you get the chance to swim in the sea, I really think you can learn an awful lot from swimming in an ocean environment. Thinking about some of the things we've just said there and put them into practice. And what you said there about what Richard Varga said about lengthening the stroke and shortening the stroke, I mean, it just immediately makes me go, aerodynamics on the bike. Riding into the wind, you have got to have the power down, and maybe you're not in your tightest aero position. Whereas when we've got a tailwind, you really get in that super aero position, and you can come off the power a little bit there and use aerodynamics. And that's nearly simpler for people because it's on land and it's just two things. The sea is, we're talking about two perfect different scenarios there, swimming into the chop. Well, what about if you're swimming across the chop or diagonally? What do you do? But the proprioception is a massive thing in swimming. Proprioception of what you are doing, being aware of it, rather than it just being metronomic and I just do what I do and hope I get through it. So all interesting thoughts ahead of open water season.
So when we eventually get into open water, hopefully, for most people, maybe that's May, the middle of May, June is the temperature starts to heat up. I know I live next to the sea right now, and it's about 7.5, 8 degrees right now. So definitely no swimming. And the coming months that will get up to something higher. Probably not very warm, but something higher. When we get into open water, how often would you recommend people try to get in? Is it a weekly thing? Is it every so often? What's the best case scenario?
I think the first thing to pick up on is what you were saying about when we get into open water. I have athletes who are like, right, the lake's open, I'm going to the lake, and I'm like, it's 11 degrees. You're going to go and you're going to lose one of your swims a week, and you're going to get out and say, I lasted 15 minutes, but it's okay because I got in. I personally think take your wetsuit to the pool, do what we do it, get to a temperature that you can get a training session done. And we'll come on to this, just going to the lake with no plan versus having a plan and a structure. So in terms of how often, I do think it's different for different people. People that are nervous probably need to go more often. People that struggle with swimming in there. I have a very good athlete, actually, who's done very well in the UK in the last couple of years, that he has to swim in his wetsuit multiple times a week. It's one of the biggest things that holds him back. He's actually quite a slight, for want of a better word, skinny guy, and just doesn't seem to have the strength to swim well in his suit, so he has to swim in it all the time. I think look, the reality for most people is probably once a week. If you live near enough to a lake and you can swim twice a week, great. That's even more important. You have a plan when you go in twice a week, and for some people it could just be maybe in the race build. So you've got sort of three different, they're fine in the pool up until they need to get used to the suit, used to sighting, whatever, and do a few weeks before the race. So maybe it's not as regular as. But look, I think talking a positive about open water, I think diving into that lake is just always a lovely feeling as well. And we have to remember we're not just doing this sport for the results at the end of it, are we? I think outdoor swimming is. It was always one of my favourite things. I think I had to drag myself to the lake because it was a bit of a faff to get to my lake. But when I was there, I always felt great getting out of the water afterwards. You feel like you've done something in nature, don't you? Anyway, I've turned into a hippie. Yes, yeah. I guess the question back to you is then: if you're swimming once, twice, or infrequently at the lake, what's the plan?
There are a number of different ways that we can enter the open water. The first thing that we can start to plan in is just a long session. One of the old Brett Sutton classics was 15 minutes medium, 15 minutes moderate, 15 minutes mad, as he liked to describe it. But, it was essentially 45 minutes of continuous, hard, or certainly strong swimming to build up that real endurance. And even if you start at 20 minutes of just straight swimming, it's a good kind of first introduction to open water swimming. We can then get into some of the kind of specifics of open water, such as disrupting your rhythm, doing some hard parts into some kind of long, steady parts. And then if you are with a group, if you are with people, then you can certainly practice all these things that we did practice in the pool, and start to do that open water when you've got a little bit more freedom, a little bit more space, a little bit more creativity, perhaps. Do you have any other sessions you would add?
Yeah, look, I think I sort of go. We're going to develop skills and develop fitness. So, look, I'm a big lover of, yeah, sort of similar to what you were saying, 70.3, 30 minutes at, start a bit below race effort, finish a bit above race effort. I think it's a really solid session. I've seen great results from, and it really works. But I again, most people go to the lake to just swim around. They're not necessarily honing in on those skills enough, and they're not, in my opinion, working hard, because ultimately, what have you got coming up? A race. What do you want to get better at? The race. Do stuff that's going to make you better at the race. Not just, it's a lovely Sunday morning, I'm just going to do some laps of the lake at this like grey area. It's not easy enough. It's not hard enough. So I like people to go to the lake, and um, in swim session terms, it's either a mixed pace session, so it's some skills, a bit of race start stuff, maybe some sighting, and then maybe finished with a short bit of race pace work. And you getting a good blend across the hour, and there's maybe like 15 minutes of each thing in there, and you've had some structure, and that's quite good when there's a bit of fatigue from other stuff you've done. Gets the body feeling good, gets you thinking about the skills, and it crosses that bridge between we're not just doing an hour of skills work, we're doing some skills, and I guess I do try to create like a process over the summer of what we're going to learn in what order. I don't go straight in with how to roll over the back of someone to get to the other side. It's probably a skill needed less in age group racing. Sighting is very high on the agenda early on. And then in terms of structure of the sessions, I do like people to do like short bouts of hard swimming. I don't think that's used in, we do a lot of short reps in the pool. Short, hard work in the open water with the wetsuit on. In fact, I think I seem to remember you talking about this last year to me, actually, when we were talking about open water training for athletes. 30 seconds hard, 30 seconds easy with the wetsuit on is a great session. You can build that out. The race pace work, and then I guess guiding athletes to try and find small groups to train with of similar abilities. So you sort of know that might be 3 or 4 of you every week, and you sort of know who's slightly stronger and sits on the front, and the others sit on the feet or on the hip, and you then turn this race pace workout into the skills session because you've made it into what the race is. And for me, yeah, a lot of it is just about, if you're going to go to the lake, replicate, if you're going to the lake once a week, I would do one of those two things and try to make it progressive as the season goes on. I think if you go multiple times a week, I think you can split up, using one as a lighter session where you do get to just do some easy endurance swimming in the lake, but you've done some skills work with it, and then you make the other one a key session.
No, I would agree with that. I think one of the biggest challenges with open water swimming is definitely sighting. And practicing that open water, I think, is essential 100%. And there are a number of ways that we can do that. But it definitely requires practice. And the first thing, pick that big monument, whether that's a hill, a mountain, a big tree, a lamppost, a shed, whatever it is. Pick these things out and understand not necessarily I have to swim directly to that, but understand where that is in relation to the direction that you want to swim. And always try and keep it in that direction. That is, we're trying to build a little bit of a layer on top of swimming towards the water bottle.
I
And
think
to
I think
take
it's a
that,
really important one, that understanding land. Again, people, going out on the race course. If you get to a race, if you're going out a few days before a race, you're racing abroad or you're racing a local race, try and get out on the swim course and see the. I remember it at Marbella World Champs last year. Just swimming out with the athletes and sitting in the middle of the swim course and going, look, here's your sight lines. Even swimming at the same time, and I know I'm stepping away from the lake and putting them on the race course here, but thinking about sightlines, even further. Race day morning, where's the sun? If you're swimming straight out to sea or something, where's the sun? Where's the end of the headland in relation to that first buoy? Because you might not be able to see it, etc. But yeah, certainly in your training, getting used to, I personally would. I'm not swimming at the buoy. I'm swimming at the tree above it, or the shape of the trees or something, because then because to see the buoy is much harder. You're gonna have to either keep your head up a bit longer or move your head a bit more, whereas to see the shape of the trees or the shape of the buildings you're swimming towards is a much quicker thing.
you can even use the sun to sight. You mentioned, what if the sun's in your eyes? What if that's blinding you? Well, if you know where the sun is in relation to the buoy because you've checked it out before the race start, then you can actually just use that to your advantage. Okay, well, the sun's coming from that direction. I need to swim in this direction. Okay, well, I need to keep the sun there, and then I'm swimming in a straight line. But
I
these
can
are all
tell you a
things that you
UK
have to
race, Weymouth 70.3. If it's a sunny day, right, you cannot see the boat. I remember the lead pack taking a weird right turn and disappearing, and I ended up in the lead of the swim because I was just swimming at the sun. I couldn't even tell they'd gone the wrong way. It was only when I got out of the water, someone gave me a position check, and I was like, where have they all gone? And they'd gone massively out of the way. And actually, yeah, you're dead right. And it's if the sun is going to be in line with that buoy, well, don't look directly at the sun, but swim towards it. You'll soon work out where it is.
go towards the light. No, all these things are super, super useful, but you have to, I think, to kind of reiterate, you have to practice these things ahead of time. It's so advantageous. If you do have the opportunity, like for myself, for example, I live right next to the sea. I can walk down, I can be in the water in 5 minutes. Would you ever advise somebody just to swim open water, not to do any pro sessions?
As a halfway house, or something I just thought of a minute ago is, whilst we're saying go and do these open water specific sessions, you're actually asking, someone goes, it's a lovely day, you've set me 10 400s. Fine, go to the lake, swim 10 by 6 minutes. Say in recovery, you can take a session to open water just because it's written as a pool. Don't necessarily, just convert it to time and go and do it in the open water. I don't think it's going to make you a worse swimmer. Would I ever say people should only? I probably have been through a period where I did only swim open water with Chris, actually, when we were actually operating a lake for a while. And I can't remember whether it was, I don't particularly remember it being negative for my swimming, because you're not swimming open water 12 months of the year. You've sort of developed that fitness and moved it to the open water. Um, I think I'd take it on a case by case basis. I think if someone needs to really improve technique, and they really need to work on their swim specific fitness, I probably would want pool sessions in there. I think that's very. I think maybe if you have an incredibly capable swimmer who's getting ready for a race in 6 to 8 weeks, and that's the option that's easiest for them, and then maybe yeah. But I think for most people, I still think that technique is such a massive part of what we do that I think that's very hard to work on an open water environment.
Swam open water only when COVID hit for a good 6 months. Started in April, which was way too cold, and I all the way to September when we were finally allowed in the pool. And I definitely noticed a little bit missing. Just from that, you don't have the same objectivity, you don't have the same. I don't know what pace I'm swimming. I know it's hard or I know it's easy, but I don't really know the pace. I think you just, if you do it for too long, I think you just miss a little something. You miss a little something. How important is that for most people? I'm not sure, but I think, try and keep a little bit of pool swimming in for sure.
Most people's limiter is technique, and I think technique is best developed in the pool and taken to open water, not developed in open water. I think that's a fairly true. You've got so many other things to think about in the open water. You need that controlled environment to improve. Even if you're a good swimmer, you're trying to improve on a certain area, do that in the pool, take it to open water is probably my advice there.
We've spoken a lot about the physical elements of, whether that's technique or, the kind of physiology needed to swim open water. But as we kind of spoke about at the start, and actually what triggered this podcast idea was more to do with the psychology of open water swimming, because it is such a big part of triathlon. It's such a big part of swimming outside. It's a scary thing for most people. How do you go about overcoming that?
How do we go about? I'm gonna pause while I think this. Again, the answer is individual. What's your specific problem? But if you think about common issues, and I sort of talked about a big one earlier, is just not being at home in that environment. Spend more time in that environment. We were on camp last week actually, and the difference in people's ability descending on a bike from the start of the week to the end of the week was enormous. Yes, I did some teaching of it, but it doesn't account for that difference. That was environment. So absolutely put yourself in the environment. I think, like I said, be willing to see it as a fun thing. It becomes, play, as I talked about earlier, and then train specifically for your issue. So, try and give you an example here. Athlete X, who is a real person, it struggles with this hypoxic issue when starting the race. It goes off hard, they can't get their breath, they have to pull to the side and pull over, and it's not a very nice feeling. This person's a good swimmer as well, actually. Was the wetsuit put on properly? Is the wetsuit a bit tight? Was definitely something we discussed. And then also just is the athlete warmed up properly? Are they, what do they suddenly change the way they breathe in the early part of the because their brain goes into race mode and they're not actually exhaling properly? Because probably when you feel a bit like that, you're not actually out of oxygen, you're actually just too much carbon dioxide. So, yeah, I guess addressing each person's specific worries. And, there'll be people listening to this that go, I'm new to the sport, I'm really nervous about open water. So where do they start? Very, very short, but short bouts of swimming in open water. Swim out 30 seconds, swim back 30 seconds. Even simpler, go into the lake, put your head underwater. Yeah, it's dark. Just start to get used to that. I've seen it all the way to the point where people just freak out when they put their head under in an environment where they can't see where they're going. So I think it's quite individual. I don't know whether you were going to take this conversation a slightly different direction.
No, I was just going to share my experience that whenever I've got an athlete that is a little bit worried, I often share this story because I think it's quite applicable to most people. When I was, I can't remember now, 2018, 2019 maybe, something like that. I was doing a race, and if you've ever watched an ITU race, No, but the swim can be rather boisterous, especially at the boys, and I get dunked under the water. Somehow my goggles ended up over my mouth, come back up, heart rate 180 beats per minute, already hypoxic because I've just sprinted 300 metres, tried to take a gulp of air, didn't because my goggles were in my mouth, and I had a real panic. I stopped, I froze, I paddled to the end of the swim, and then that was my race. But after that, I really, really struggled, and every swim I did was it was a panic. It was similar to you described with athlete X there. I would feel really hypoxic, and it was a mild panic attack. It's just rabbit in the headlights, having a real panic. And working with a psychologist, I was lucky enough to have that service, and I was working with a psychologist, and they explained it to me so brilliantly, and I think it's applicable to the vast majority of these cases that aren't maybe totally deep rooted. And that is, you've done a big scary thing, or there is a big scary thing, and maybe that's open water swimming. And if you were to label that, it might be a 7 or 8 out of 10 on the panic inducing scale. And so exactly the same as training, you need to kind of have a bit of a graded exposure to that. So you need to find something that's mildly stressing, in the same vein. So exactly as you were saying, maybe it's dipping your toes in open water to start, and that triggers maybe a 3 or a 4 out of 10, and you keep on doing that until that 3 or 4 becomes so normal that it's a 1 or a 2, and then you increase it, and then you increase it, and you increase it until suddenly swimming open water isn't such a panic inducing thing.
This makes me think about Alex Honnold, and his crazy climbing exploits, the Dawn Wall and the building, and they talk about this part of his brain that doesn't light up the same because he doesn't feel fear. And then I listened to a podcast where he sort of explained, he's like, well, yeah, that's what happens now, but it's a result of a process. I'm not just naturally that way. It's just he's just gone to such an extreme length to not get scared doing things other people would get scared doing. And yeah, you're right. On a much milder level, this is it. And again, within the sphere of coaching, I think we think a lot about the physical training and not as much about the psychological, because it's a little bit more complex, or maybe not what's being studied. But actually, from experience you have with athletes yourself, in a long time in the sport, you've sort of seen all of these problems, and I think it's really worth talking to athletes about, even those that are you think are fine. I would have come, to any coach, I would have come across fine. I was getting good times in the swim, but I'd be halfway around that swim, and I would start to feel like I am really, I'm hanging on to the back of the pack. I can't breathe. This feels horrible. I actually want to stop for a second. Like, I can't get my breath, or you've even swallowed a bit of water the wrong way, or you've got some water in your goggles you can't fix, and that's bothering you. And you become really claustrophobic. I become claustrophobic mid swim. I can't breathe, and it actually was just in training, learning the answer to this was breathe out really hard for a while. Make sure you're really getting all the carbon dioxide. And that was just my way of calming myself. And a minute later, you'd be fine and back on with the swim. But so I don't think, any coaches listening, don't take it for granted that just because you've got people that seem reasonably competent at this, that they are. I think most people in an alien environment with your head underwater and you're going hard, it's going to be some weird stuff goes through your mind at some point. And, I've had a very similar dunking experience back in 2013, actually, that I was under the water with. In fact, there's a video on YouTube of it. 2013 Ironman France start. I basically ran off this was back when 2,000 people start together and you run off the beach. And I'll try and find it actually as a trailer for this podcast. It's you dive off a shelf, and the guy, typical friend, they sort of went 10, 9, 8, 7, and everyone just went on 7. And being a Brit, I was obviously willing to wait till the word go. So I just got forced forward and landed upon, and then had, 10, 20, 30 athletes swim over the top. I couldn't get back up. I just remember like bodies above me, and I'm trying to get up, and I reckon I was probably only down there 20 or 30 seconds, which felt like minutes at the time. And I let everyone go past and just had a couple of minutes to myself, and then got on with my day. And yeah, I think that in a way, actually, no, probably different to yourself. I actually think um, I think I had such a bad experience that day that I always looked at that and went, well, nothing's going to be as bad as that again. And I survived that. So, yeah, I probably had a slightly, I guess my surfing background, I've been held under by enough waves to sort of know the best thing to do is just relax. It takes a long time to actually run out of air. So you'll probably be okay. And look,
And
I shouldn't belittle the dangers of open water swimming. We do know that there are some real dangers to it as well. So yeah,
for sure, I think we share these stories not necessarily to make open water seem more scary. That's definitely not the intended response here. But to show that, some things are scary, and if you put a little bit of practice in, you can overcome those scary moments. Like Phil, for example, certainly carried on swimming after those scenarios, and myself, I was able to get back and to racing at my best. But it just takes a little bit of work and a little bit of different work to maybe sometimes we're used to. But it's always possible to overcome, adapt, get better, and I guarantee you'll feel so much more proud when you do overcome these things.
yeah. I think off the back of that, people often ask us, hey coach, where should I line up at the start of a swim? And actually, what we were just talking about there, I think if at the pointy end of things, you have got to teach yourself to be in those positions because it will happen. No one means to dunk you; it's just what happens in a race. But I also think at the other end of things, when people are newer to the sport and it's their first race and they're just looking to safely get around the swim, of course, don't put yourself right in the middle at the front. Find the correct position, but don't just sort of accept that, well, this is where I am, this is where this is also a process. Well, the next race, do you know what, I'm going to actually see if I can get onto feet, because now I've learned to swim on feet and I want to get that extra draft advantage. And then the next race, actually I swam quite well in the last race, I'm going to move up a little bit more. And what will the challenges be of being further, until you get to the point where, yeah, I'm in a situation here where this is going to get quite aggressive because I'm now, around a load of quite competitive athletes who are all jostling for position to the first turn buoy. And go through, don't avoid those processes. Think of yourself as probably over several years for a lot of people. But it's not just your swimming gets better. Your skills have to improve along the way, or not improve. Your skills have to be different. There's different things to cope with at different parts of the field.
Yeah, there's an evolution, right? There's an evolution of those skills. There's an evolution of those training principles as well. And quite frankly, now is the time to start thinking about that. If you've got a race coming up this summer, to start practicing these things in the pool, take it to open water in the next few weeks, month, depending on where you live and what you've got access to, and make a point of doing it on a weekly basis. If weekly is not logistically possible, at least bi-weekly. Just get into these environments as often as possible and become accustomed to swimming in different places, the challenges those things represent. You'll become more confident, much more resilient, and a much better swimmer because of it.
And make it fun. Find a little crew to go training with. That's the most important thing. Unless you've got anything else to add, I think we've just open water swimmed ourselves for the week. So yeah, I'm looking forward. In fact, there is talk about starting to get in the lake in 2 or 3 weeks from now. So yeah,
I will
nice
wait a
time of
little
year
bit longer before I jump in the sea. You might catch me in there in July.
You probably only get 2 weeks a year up there, don't you? So, right, catch you next week.
See ya.